Hello, everyone, and welcome to Journey Through Reality. Today, I am joined by Ed, who writes the Substack Philosophical Convictions. And we are going to take a little bit of a journey through arguments for theism. We're going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the most popular arguments for theism and then show maybe what their strengths are and then where they also fail. It's a bit ironic, actually, because I'm a theist and Ed isn't a theist, but you'll probably hear him being a lot more complimentary towards these arguments than I will be. I'm not sure. I don't know that there's many arguments for God that I think that's successful. But anyway, Ed, I'll just hand it over to you quickly just to, as people join, to sort of introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, your Substack, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. So my name is Ed, and I run the Philosophical Convictions Substack. I'm a university student. I study philosophy and theology. My main focus is usually on like ethics and meta-ethics, but obviously I try to be a bit of an all-rounder. I'm on the atheist side, but I think I will be trying to convince Ben a little bit here, especially the ontological argument. I consider myself a bit of a nicer atheist. I think a lot of these arguments have plausibility to them, even though that is just a report about my own psychology. I do think they contribute probabilistic value to the existence of God, even though I think they ultimately fail. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about me. I was raised Catholic, I think. I was raised Catholic. I eventually transitioned to atheism. And
okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Started right about around the time where I started studying philosophy, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, sometimes thinking will make you doubt some of the claims of some Christians, but there we go. But yeah, I know I am a theist, but I'm not necessarily a theist of the classical thought. I guess I'm what you would call panentheist. And so I think a lot of the popular or classical arguments for God either have assumptions that I reject, or they're kind of based on presuppositions that I think are very controversial. But maybe you'll convince me that some of them are better than I thought initially. But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, we're just going to go through a list of the popular ones and kind of give a bit of an analysis and see what we think of them. So what is up first, Ed?
First on the list, we have the Kalaam Cosmological Argument.
Cool. Kalaam Cosmological Argument. So this is obviously the popularizer of the Kalaam in contemporary apologetics is William Lane Craig. And it goes something like, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. So I think on the face of it, you actually like I went through a stint a few years ago where I thought the Kalaam was quite a good argument, and it was something that I defended. But I've after reflecting on it more and learning more about it, I think it has some serious problems. But let's start with the strengths first of all. What do you think the strengths of this argument are, other than being like very elegant and just simple?
Yeah, totally. So there is actually a fourth premise that a lot of people tend to miss.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth premise is that, so you get, therefore the universe has a cause. Then you get to say that because of the contingent nature of the universe, that cause must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, and powerful. Because it must exist outside of the contingent aspects that the universe contains, like time, space, things like that, right?
So I guess he's trying to do a bit of a conceptual analysis of that cause and then try and demonstrate why it's closer to what most people conceive of as being something like God.
Yeah, exactly. Because the biggest, although the worst objection to the Kalaam cosmological argument is it doesn't get you to a personable and a personable God like Christians.
Yeah, which I've always found a bit weird. It's kind of like uh, anytime an atheist is like, well, none of the arguments like get you to like God as such, and I'm kind of like, well, that's not necessarily their intention. They're not trying to prove that the God of the Abrahamic faiths is the correct understanding of God or whatever. They're just trying to establish a very sort of minimal classical definition. Not always classical, actually, that's a lie, but they're trying to establish a very minimal um, definition, and then usually there is some succeeding conceptual analysis to show why this whatever this abstract principle that we've now established must have particular properties that we associate with being God. Um, so yeah, I think that's a terrible just for out of the gates. I think that's a terrible objection. But
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. As Pascal said, God of Abraham, not the God of the philosophers, right? Um, so I think in terms of strength, I think it's a pretty good argument overall. First premise: whatever begins to exist has a cause. We could treat this two different ways. It could be an empirical claim, or it could be sort of a metaphysical claim. Obviously, William Lane Craig intends it to be a metaphysical one. Um, but and famously, this is the most challengeable premise, right? That when people want to disagree with the Kalam, this is the premise they go after. And in fact, some of the worst, like Reddit atheist arguments against God have come from this, where they ask, okay, well, why doesn't God have a cause then? And obviously, there are two responses: A, he didn't begin to exist, and B, he necessarily exists, which are sort of the same thing, but two different claims. And but the atheist will typically say, or like the Reddit atheist at least, will say like, oh, well, you're doing special pleading. That's been a long used but widely thrown out by contemporary philosophers, sort of informal fallacy, right?
mhm,
It just doesn't work because of the definition of God, which is he is by definition necessary.
yeah,
Um, Strengths for the second premise, I think actually that this is the most challengeable premise. I disagree with most of the last however long this argument's been around. Um, the universe began to exist. I don't see any reason to suppose that. Scientific, in terms of scientific studies, you have like the A theory and the B theory of time, right?
sure, yeah,
And I think both are pretty plausible. But I think I can't remember quite the difference, but I think I'm on the B theory side here.
yeah. So a theory of time is something like only. Well, there are different versions of it, but mostly it's conflated with something like presentism, which would say only the present is ontologically real, and then the past and the future don't exist
Mhm.
to some extent. And then B theory would say that past, present, and future all exist on the same sort of ontological level, and we are just kind of like moving in the same way that there are like locations in space, there are also locations in time, so that we are just moving across this kind of like this field of time or whatever you want, not field, but we are moving through time rather than time moving through us.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think I agree. I think I'm more on B theory than I am on A theory. So, but what do you say to the point that, well, some people will bring up the Big Bang and say, well, okay, well, the Big Bang demonstrates that the universe began to exist.
Yeah. So obviously, this is what we call sort of pop science. Not in that it's like lower quality, although you could make an argument for that. Not that it's necessarily lower quality, but it's meant to be an understanding for the general population, right? Um, in terms of uh, the Big Bang, that beginning doesn't get you an absolute beginning, right? So Big Bang doesn't get you creation ex nihilo, right?
Right.
Uh, Two, that's the beginning of what we might call our observable universe. That doesn't mean the beginning of everything. There exist things technically outside of the observable universe that encompasses us, and that doesn't quite get you there. And there's there was a fantastic podcast. It was Alex O'Connor, and he had two physicists on, I think, and they were talking about how before the Big Bang there's this continuous expanding, and then this is where you get the crunch, right? And so this is where you sort of get into, well, infinite regress in terms of time isn't actually a big problem for either physicists or philosophers. And that's where I think the challenge to the second premise is unless you can show either philosophically or empirically that there's a good reason to believe that the universe or that time doesn't extend back infinitely, the whole the whole this must have a cause, therefore the cause is God doesn't really work because there's no cause, right?
So, are there any good, if we can't then point to like empirical data like the Big Bang, are there any good philosophical arguments to think that time can't extend infinitely into the past? Because, William Lane Craig will point to like the Hilbert's, what's it called? Hilbert's Hotel, is that the right?
Yeah, Hilbert's
thought
Hotel.
experiment, which I'm not sure I understand, to be frank. And so, yeah, do any of those arguments succeed? This idea that hotel, what did I say? Sorry, thank you, Jonathan, in the chat. I don't know why I said Hilbert's Hotel. Yeah, are there any good reasons to think that time can't extend into the past?
Yeah, so let's talk about Hilbert's Hotel then. Yeah. So it's a thought experiment about actual infinities, introduced by David Hilbert.
And do you mind just making this distinction, clearing out this distinction between a potential and an actual infinity for us?
Oh yeah, sure. So if we use potential and actual in the same way that like sort of Aristotle did, to kind of give us an analogy here, a potential infinity is just to say, well, that in principle this could possibly exist. Like it doesn't have to be real, just that in principle this could happen, and there's no necessary logical contradiction with it. An actual infinity, as Aristotle would say, is just going to be sort of the sorry, I'm blanking here. It's going to be that there is an actual. I don't want to use that as circular, right? That there exists a real infinity that both in practice and in principle.
It's like an actual set of infinity that we can point to in the world and say
exactly. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, that might be a better way. So potential is sort of abstracted and just conceptual, versus actual is there's this thing that we can point to, and it's real in a practical sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So Hilbert's Hotel is about actual infinities, and it was introduced by David Hilbert. You have the setup where there's a hotel with infinitely many rooms, and every room is occupied. A new guest then arrives. So we have a paradoxical move, essentially, is what William Lane Craig usually talks about, where we have to shift each guest from room N to room N plus 1 because of this new guest. So room 1 becomes free. So the hotel accommodates the new guest despite being full. And if you take it to its extremities, infinitely many new guests arrive, send current guests from room N up to room 2N, and all odd numbered rooms free up, which means infinite capacity from a quote unquote full hotel. So what this is really doing is, this isn't a mathematical or an empirical argument. This is more or less appealing to our finite intuitions. How can something full have room for more? And Kalaam defenders like William Lane Craig use Hilbert Hotel to argue that actual infinities lead to absurdities. An actual infinite cannot exist in reality, and the past can't be infinite. Therefore, the universe began to exist. So this is usually framed as like infinite pasts are metaphysically impossible. You can't traverse an infinite, or the worst one, in my opinion, you'd never reach the present moment.
Yes, it's that paradox of the what is it? It's not Zeno's paradox, is it?
Close, yeah, it's something like that. Yeah, it's like the clap.
Every time you think you've got to the finish line, you move halfway there and then halfway there, and you can do that infinitely.
Yeah, because just on the assumption that space is infinitely divisible. Yeah,
Sure.
Zeno's paradox. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the worst one in my opinion. You'd never reach the present moment. But I'll get to that.
Mhm.
So the atheist response is to say, well, okay, so this is counterintuitive, right? It works against our intuitions, but that you can't get the inference from that to impossible or even absurd. Hilbert's Hotel just shows that infinite sets behave differently from finite ones. You don't get logical contradiction, you don't get metaphysical incoherence, and you don't get ontological impossibility. The argument is more or less, this feels absurd, therefore it can't exist.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, nature does not care about human intuitions. There is no contradiction in the setup. We don't get something like A and not A. Right? There's just no actual formal contradiction. Instead, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's no reason to think that the past cannot stretch in. The past cannot be infinite. Basically, there's no reason to think that on a purely philosophical basis.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And but of course, the biggest one is, if and the worst one, like I said, is, if the past were infinite, well, we just never get to the present moment. There's an infinite amount of events in between us and the present.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, this is how I found Alex, because he said this in one of his articles. And I was, this is Alex Left Brain Mystic, by the way, because he said this in one of his articles, and I just had to jump in and point that out, that's just not quite true, because he seemed very scientific, and I was like, well, that's not really what the scientific consensus says right now. Because, if we just think about it for a few seconds, right? You have the present, and you have an infinitely stretching past. Well, the problem is you're treating it like it's a ruler, and we're moving along the ruler like 0, 1, 2, 3. No. We're just the 0, and the 0 is moving along, right? We could just be contained in the infinite set of events. The present is a misunderstanding, right? It's like the present is 1, and somehow we have to get from 0 to 1. No, we're just the 0, and we're moving along. So that objection from theists has always been the worst, in my opinion, even from a scientific perspective.
Yeah. So, well, it seems like the argument falls down right there. But even if we go back to premise 1, the idea that things begin to exist, William Lane Craig is going to appeal to basically like our everyday observations and be like, well, if a table begins to exist, therefore, every example we have a table beginning to exist has been caused by something that creates that table or brings those parts together to create the table. But of course, there is a symmetry breaker between those everyday things and the universe for this argument to run, at least, because he's taking it that the universe would begin to exist ex nihilo, which is different from things that begin to exist in everyday life. They begin to exist, even if we can use that language. They begin to exist out of pre-existing stuff. Basically, it's just a rearrangement of things that already exist, and so he seems to be. I'm not sure if it's quite begging the question, but he's there is this lack of symmetry between the universe beginning to exist and everyday things beginning to exist. Is that fair to say, or do you have issues with that?
No, I don't have any issues with that. I think that it's exactly what Craig is doing, where he's just appealing to like everyday intuitions and like not even really empirical, because it's not actually repeated with like just everyday intuitions and observations, which I think is just not the right way to go about this. It's an intuitive argument, I'll give him that. It's just not a definitive or decisive one.
Yeah, but because like we've never observed a universe coming into existence, so we don't even know what that would be like from a human perspective.
Yes, exactly,
Uh,
which is also the problem with the fine-tuning argument.
mm, yeah, we'll get to that later, but yeah, it sounds like the Kalaam is not holding up to scrutiny. So any final thoughts on the Kalaam or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Kalaam, Cosmological Argument. Sorry, William Lane Craig. It's not working. Not working, man. Um, okay, what's next on our list?
So, yeah, this one is one of my favorites, and the one I'm actually most experienced with is the contingency plus the principle of sufficient reason argument.
Okay, so contingency arguments go something like, well, there's a family of contingency arguments, but they're always something like um, things that exist in the world do so contingently. They are contingent on other things for their existence. They could have failed to exist. They could have been otherwise. For example, I am a contingent being. I could have either not existed or been different from what I am. My hair could have been blonde instead of brown, for example, or whatever else. So there are contingent things or contingent facts about the world that could have been different. And those contingent things need some sort of explanation for their existence.
Mm-hmm.
And that explanation has to have some sort of terminus. Otherwise, if there is a basically infinite regress of explanations, then we haven't explained the entire sort of causal chain. And equally, you can't sort of add up all of the contingent facts to make some sort of necessary fact. So, ergo, therefore, there must be some necessary fact or necessary being outside of the realm of contingency that explains all contingent facts. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Cool.
So,
So what's the strength of this argument? Because I quite like it. I think it's quite good.
I do too. But so strengths is the PSR is just like super obvious to some people. It just
So
seems like
what's PSR to people who don't know?
totally. So the principle of sufficient reason is essentially, well, there are two versions. But we're talking about the strong version. The strong
Sure.
version of the principle of sufficient reason is to say that everything, every fact, every truth, and every event has sufficient reason for why it obtains or for why it is the way it is, rather than anything else, rather than any other way. Right. So the fact that 2 + 2 = 4, under this principle, there is a sufficient reason for why 2 and 2 added to 2 obtains 4 rather than anything else. That's the strong version of the principle of sufficient reason. And when we use strong in philosophy, we just mean that it makes a more extreme or radical claim. The weak version is just a causal version, which is just to say that every event or contingent event has a sufficient reason for why it is the way it is rather than not. But that's besides the point. So the strength is that the PSR just seems like super intuitive and obvious to most people, or to a lot of people at least.
And even people would argue that kind of most of philosophy and science rests on PSR being true. Because if it's not, then our assumption that the world is intelligible and has explanations and all this kind of stuff seems unjustified.
Exactly, yeah. I take a little bit of issue when people say that the scientific enterprise rests on that assumption. I don't necessarily take that to be the case. Even if I don't think something has a cause, it could be that I just want to see if it does, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of just ignores preferential treatment rather than, this has to be caused by something else, But
Yeah.
I agree that generally scientists take that to be an assumption, just not the entire enterprise.
No, that's good. So how does PSR link in with this contingency argument then?
Yeah, so like I said, strong PSR is the one that the most contingency arguments deal with. And so it is to say that there cannot be one contingent fact, both by definition of contingent and by the strong PSR, that exists and does not have an explanation Therefore, once we go all the way back in this causal chain, we have to hit something that is necessary, right? We just have to, both on the basis that the PSR claims that everything has to have that sufficient reason, every fact. So if we try to ground facts, I mean, there's no causal predecessors to the fact, right? 2 + 2 = 4. What's the causal preceding mechanism that gets you y is 4? Well, you don't have anything. I mean, not causally, at least. You have to sort of get that hierarchical stuff, and then you get to God. And so this is why the strong PSR is such a good, I guess, a good adjacent concept to take with the contingency arguments, is that it really just, it's there for moral support, really.
Yeah,
Really,
because it seems really intuitive and also really satisfying to be like, okay, everything in our theory of reality can be accounted for. Like, how awesome is that?
I think it's awesome, right?
Um, why? I mean, I guess we can get some other issues with the contingency argument in particular in a second, but why might we doubt the truth of PSR?
Yeah, so Peter Van Inwagen is, in my opinion, the greatest objector to the PSR. I mean, so this objection only really works if the PSR is used to support theism, right? Outside of that, you have to come up with other reasons.
Sure.
But so Peter Van Inwagen goes, okay, well, so you have a fact, right? And under this PSR, this fact has to somehow be explained. Or sorry, we'll take an event. This event has to somehow be explained by a previous event. And by definition of the strong PSR, this event, or the preceding event, makes it so that this next event obtains rather than not, or is the way it is rather than any other way. And this explains it. This absolutely and sufficiently explains it. So Peter Van Inwagen is going to appeal to two things here. A, our use of the word sufficient, and B, the sort of causal relationship between those two events. So say I already have event P. Event P happens, and event P is the sufficient explanation for event Q. If I already have event P, how is event Q contingent in any meaningful way? If this is the sufficient explanation for it, and is the reason it obtains, and is the way it is, rather than any other way. That doesn't sound like contingent to me or Peter Van Inwagen. That sounds like it's necessarily the case. Right? So P implies Q. If P, then Q, and P is necessarily the case, and Q follows, then Q necessarily follows, right? It sufficiently explains it, and by use of the word sufficient, as Peter Van Inwagen goes about saying, is if I have sufficient reason to say that you, Ben, stole the last donut, I obviously don't have good reason to believe otherwise. All of the reasons and inferences I have made compile into a sufficient reason to believe that you have stolen the donuts, and therefore I don't believe otherwise. Now, if I did believe otherwise, you'd say I had insufficient reason, right?
Yep.
So, we get this sort of, you've sort of contradicted the definition of contingent events. You don't really have that anymore, and that contradicts the definition of PSR. Well, that doesn't contradict the definition of PSR. It contradicts the very argument PSR was meant to support, the contingency argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just doesn't seem like events are now contingent. It seems like you have made them necessary, right? I think Inwagen called this necessitarianism, right? I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think Spinoza did it. Well, maybe Spinoza didn't say that, but Spinoza is a oh my gosh, a necessitarian. Wow,
It's a difficult
that's
word.
a difficult word to say. But yeah, so it seems like, yeah, if all facts are necessary anyway, then I mean, it seems to undermine the argument. But even if it is the case that all facts are necessary, why should we not still expect there to be some sort of terminus or some sort of first principle?
Well, so that is actually not the problem. So
Okay.
Inwagen says, okay, fine, so maybe you have this first principle. But well, actually, I'll get to that. But the biggest problem with this, if you make every event essentially necessary, right? Every event, fact, all of those necessary,
Mhm.
you have done away with free will.
Yeah.
There is no, so like free will is based on the assumption that there are contingent events and we have the power to affect our contingent actions, preference. We are contingent beings, and therefore anything that follows from us must be contingent. But if you take away that contingency and we are now necessary and everything that happens, every event, fact, all of that is necessary, you've lost free will. And that is going to contradict theism.
Could
For
you not?
example,
Could you not still be a theist and deny free will? It's a strange sort of theism,
that is
but
for Protestantism. Yeah, that's their thing, right?
well, yeah, some Calvinists claim to believe in free will, but then um, undermine it with their own theology. Um,
Yeah. I
but yeah,
personally, I obviously have my own issues with free will.
sure.
But yeah, if you were to work under the theistic assumption of free will, or at least the classical theistic assumption of free will, um, that's going to contradict. I mean, you're just not going to. You can't have your cake and eat it, right? I mean, you're going to have to choose between wanting the strong PSR or wanting free will. And if you find that you can't do away with one of them, then you're going to have to resolve that contradiction another way.
Mhm.
But so the reason that you could say that, well, why should we doubt that we have this sort of first cause or first principle?
Hmm.
Well, the issue under PSR, and I haven't explored this line of thought before, but what I'm just, on face value, it seems like I could just stop before that.
Yeah, yeah,
It seems like if everything is necessary, all facts, all events, all that's necessary, it seems like I could just stop before I get to God and just as plausibly say, well, it was the universe, actually. You know,
yeah,
the universe necessarily exists, therefore everything that follows from it is necessary. And,
yeah.
we've just been able to stop before God.
Yeah.
Now, you'd have to argue why that's any more probable, but
Sure. And maybe it's not. Maybe you think there's something about God that makes him a more likely first principle than the universe.
exactly. Yeah.
I think there are some good reasons to think that. But even if strong PSR still seems to face this problem, because even if we say that God is necessary, like how have we given a sufficient reason for God's existence if we're just saying that he's necessary?
Yeah. So this is, some modal logicians tend to say this, and I have a really big problem with it. So we have this distinction between necessary facts and brute facts, at least allegedly we do.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Emphasis on allegedly. 'Cause I'm about to agree with what you're about to say, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. So we have this alleged distinction. And some modal logicians will try to say that something being necessary is the explanation for it by virtue of its necessity. And I think this is stupid. I'm sorry. Quite frankly, I think it's ridiculous because, I mean, we have to differentiate between modal claims and explanatory theses, right?
Sure.
They are not the same thing. If I say something is necessary, or if you ask me, hey, why does this chair exist? And let's just suppose the chair is necessary. If you ask me why that exists, and I say, oh, well, it necessarily exists, you're not going to feel like I've given you an explanation. I haven't given you an explanation. I've given you a modal claim. I've
Yeah.
given you a description about not why that thing, about how that thing exists. I've given you the how, not the why,
Mhm.
because there is no why. And this is why I think there is a very big collapse between the distinction of brute and necessary facts. I think necessary facts are just going to sometimes be brute, unless somehow they have an explanation.
Mhm.
Some necessary facts could, in principle, have an explanation. Like if you take 2 plus 2 to be 2 plus 2 equals 4 to be necessary, you could probably appeal to logic, right? If you just assume that logical laws and things like that are necessary. There could, in principle, be necessary facts that have explanations. But a necessary fact that is a terminal uh, causal first point of a contingent chain or a necessary chain, if it doesn't have an explanation, you're no better than a brute fact. You just also have this modal description, which is your necessity.
Yeah. Because, you know, what we kind of end up with, if your objection to PSR is true, then what we end up with is just like a big, necessary, determined block of event.
Yeah.
And then you, even if you say that all of those things are grounded in this first principle, then that doesn't seem, or at least at face value, that doesn't seem to benefit theism over atheism.
No, not in any meaningful way, at least. Yeah,
Sure.
but the other way to go about just, sort of discarding the strong PSR,
Mhm.
in my opinion, it's a very simple way of doing it. You just look at normativity, right? And you sort of,
Okay.
even if we take like, I think this would work even if we took like objective facts, right? Objective morality. Sorry, if we took objective morality, like I'll be as charitable as I can and work under like theistic assumptions. All right, if we take objective morality, and we're in the realm of normativity now.
Mhm.
And strong PSR tells me that I have every fact accounted for. Every fact has a sufficient explanation,
Mhm.
which would include normative facts. And we go all the way back down this causal chain, and you get to, well, God is good. And I ask you, okay, well, why is God good?
Mhm.
And you tell me one of these three things. You tell me either he is by his nature, B, he is by definition, or C, he just is. All of these are brute facts.
Mhm.
All of
Yeah.
these are brute facts with no explanatory power behind them. They have it in front of them, sure, but behind them, none. These are brute facts. And if brute facts exist, the PSR can't, or at least the strong PSR can't.
Yeah.
So this tells me that not every fact is accounted for, at least normative facts. And so brute facts show a contradiction with the strong PSR, therefore no strong PSR.
Yeah. I love it. Basically PSR sucks. No,
I agree.
it's not. It's not good. But even if you put PSR aside, it seems to me that um, in order to kind of avoid the conclusion of this argument, you can just deny contingency outright, because what um, so okay, so when people are giving contingency arguments, because I'm not sure, like, what evidence do they give that facts are actually contingent?
So, all
Do
right.
we have good reason to think that, other than appealing to be, well, if we didn't, then we wouldn't have free will, or like all of this kind of stuff?
It depends on what you're defining contingent to be, right? I think it's sort of Aristotle / Aquinas who goes about defining contingent as something that will eventually cease to exist.
Yes, that is true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think things are obviously contingent in that sense,
Sure.
because at some point I will cease to exist, at least in the form I am now. The thing that we call Ben will stop existing at some point.
Right. Yeah.
So that's obvious. But in this kind of like stronger modal sense, like the could have been otherwise sense, like I could have been otherwise if this counterfactual claim.
So I think it's going to be sort of like a bottom up sort of hierarchy here. So you have free will, right? And our decisions affect the world. Therefore, anything that follows from our free will, which must itself be contingent, because eventually the form in which encapsulates that free will cease to exist. So the free will must be contingent. Therefore, anything we do to affect the world, like the color of your curtain right there, could in principle have been otherwise, and in practice.
Yeah.
So whoever painted your curtain, that color, is that a color? That might be a shade. Could have painted it some other way, right?
Yeah.
It could have been blue, it could have been red, and this is all a product of the free will. But if you show, like we did, that or that we might have, that these contingent facts themselves don't exist, then you have a problem with free will, right? Because if these follow from that, but then all of a sudden we observe or logically decide that this can't be contingent, then we have to go back to free will and ask, well, what's going on there? What's the relationship here?
Yeah.
Any other reason to suppose that things are contingent? I guess just in principle, like what stops your curtain from having been blue?
Yeah. I guess it's perfectly conceivable to think it could have been otherwise.
Yeah, sorry. That's another way that modal logicians tend to define contingency. It's just you could conceive of it having been otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, there's no one-to-one correlation between conceivability and what is metaphysically possible or not. Um, but I I agree that at least it seems perfectly intuitive that the particular states of the world seem to um, be contingent on other factors. That if they had been different, then therefore these particular states of affairs would be different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely some intuitive force behind the contingency argument. But yeah, as you said, if you're resting your contingency argument upon PSR instead of kind of just like a elegant, like, parsimony sort of approach, which is kind of the approach I would take. If you're resting it on strong PSR, then I think you've got all sorts of problems.
Oh yeah.
So, any last words on contingency or?
Contingency sucks. You know.
Cool, nice. Well, PSR sucks at least.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. What's next?
All right. So next we have Aquinas's hierarchical argument.
Yeah. So, this is also good.
Yeah.
So he's appealing to this notion of an efficient cause, which is to say that basically some fact or state of affairs is going to have some sort of cause that made it that way, that actualized it. And similar to the the logic of the contingency argument, he's gonna say that this causal chain has to have a logical terminus, otherwise you can't explain the entire chain. And you can't put all the chain together and then say that therefore it's explained. But notably, he's talking about hierarchical causation rather than linear causation. So
Yeah.
linear causation would be like a set of dominoes. So if I set up a bunch of dominoes and knocked down domino 1, which knocked down domino 2, which knocked down domino 3, and so on and so forth, I could then take domino 2 out of that chain and the rest of the chain would continue. So domino 8, 9, 10, etc., would continue falling even if I remove domino number 2. But he's appealing to hierarchical causation, which is a little bit like if you have a chandelier hanging from the ceiling, we can ask, well, what's causing that chandelier to be there? Well, it's the chain. What's causing the chain to be there? Well, it's the ceiling. What's causing the ceiling to be there? The building, the earth, gravity, blah blah blah, etc. So if you take any member of that causal chain out, then the whole chain falls apart essentially. And so it's kind of this like temporally simultaneous causal chain that he's trying to appeal to. And I quite like this. I think he's appealing to kind of like Aristotelian physics and metaphysics, but and so if I were to kind of present this argument, I would probably present it in different language, but I think it's quite a good argument. So what do you think, at least at face value?
I think it's a fantastic argument. I think it's probably like top 3 for me. So yeah, what Aquinas is appealing to here is explanatory grounding, right? Linear is more about like, okay, so we have event A. How do we get to event B? And if we go all the way back, but like that infinite regress linearly could probably be coherent. I mean, I'm not going to get into that, but it could very well be coherent.
Sure.
Aquinas thinks that infinite hierarchical regress is going to be incoherent. Now, some people have just outright rejected that assumption and said, oh, well, it could probably be coherent. But I think it's fantastic. Explanatory grounding is going to be a huge problem for somebody who doesn't use something like God, right? So we have your chandelier example. Well, the chandelier is being held up by this chain, which is being grounded explanatorily by this building. Well, what's grounding the building? Well, the earth, the crust explains how the building is standing, and we go all the way back, and eventually, well, we have to say, well, what explains like everything or the universe or something like that, and we get, oh, well, it has to be God. There has been an objection to it that I've heard that has made me think. I mean, it's really more of a semantic one.
Mhm.
And I know that in our group, I'm really the only one who's a fan of semantics. Um,
Yeah, I do know I don't do well with semantic
so
arguments, but at least hit me with it. Let's see how it lands.
I will try to be nice about this one. So, we're talking about explanatory grounding, right? Like, what explains this? What grounds this in an explanatory way? Okay, so we got the chain for the chandelier, the building for the chain, and the earth for the chain, and then we get to the earth, and like, what grounds the earth? And it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, what do you mean it is grounding the earth? Like, we tend to conceive of grounding as almost sort of either causal or physical, as some
Mhm.
sort of mechanism. What do you mean? What mechanistic procedure are you referring to when you're saying grounding the earth? Because I could say gravity, right? And I'm not sure you could follow that chain back, maybe gravity and like, oh, the laws of
Yeah,
physics.
I think you'd have to appeal to the laws of physics at that point and say, well, the Earth is the way it is because of some X law of physics and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then you get to like the laws of physics, and it's like, well, what grounds those? And it's like, well, how would we even, in principle, know what would be the thing that like? You could say God, but now we're positing things into the ontology when we could just remain agnostic about the question. Or just say this is, as Hume would put, this is outside of the realm of how humans have, for the most part of history, accrued their knowledge. Uh, I don't think that's like a knockdown objection at all. I think
Mm.
it's just to sort of posit uncertainty into the argument.
Yeah, I think to me that seems like a retreat into unintelligibility, which is okay because I think there are epistemic limits to human reasoning.
Definitely.
Um, but I think we've got to still do our best. I think kind of like being like, well, we reached this terminus and then kind of like beyond the laws of physics, then, well, who knows, man? It just, that seems like just like giving up basically. And I'm like, well, you can do that. But I could do that like at any stage, of any explanatory chain and just be like, well, okay, well, why is the sky blue? I don't know, man. Like humans aren't very clever. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that,
Yeah, no.
it doesn't seem very satisfactory to me, and it seems a bit intellectually lazy. But well, maybe you think otherwise. Maybe there's good reason to think that there are hard limits to what we can know or even speculate about.
Yeah, so okay, if we take this, right, we're going like laws of gravity. Or sorry, let's go to the universe. Let's just go there, right?
Yeah.
Um it's plausible to suggest that in principle there could be something outside of the universe that is simply okay, so like there's the observable universe, right?
Mhm.
And epistemologically, that's kind of the extent that we can go to empirically, the observable universe. I mean, there are
Mhm.
things that we like sort of can't observe, but we can using like tools, which I think
Mhm.
still just puts it back in the realm of observable.
Sure. Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so there's the observable universe, and then there's these things outside of the observable universe, and then there's things that may even be outside of the universe itself.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, okay, but if we can't get to there in terms of like that could, in principle, explanatorily ground the universe, and then like what's grounding that? But like we already don't know what that is, and it's I think there's an epistemic case to be made here for it's not implausible, but you don't gain much probabilistic value from saying, well, we could just end the chain in God, versus, well, maybe there's some physical or immaterial mechanism that's not God, that's just out there. It's a
Yeah, but
very it's a very
I
iffy argument.
I don't think that works because I think it's more we're trying to we can just appeal to a priori principles and say that well we don't know beyond the observable universe. We don't know what that explanatory grounding is, but a priori, it must have a terminus. It must have a first principle. Otherwise, there is basically no explanation. And so even if we appeal to an infinite amount of spiritual realms outside of our eternal, our observable universe, which we can do, right? There still
Yep.
must to be there must have to be. What am I saying? There still has to be this this terminus, this first cause, this first principle, or whatever. So I think even if you want to kind of appeal to epistemic limits, I'm perfectly happy with that. But I still think the argument runs a priori. What do you think about that?
I think that's a good response to like that argument. I think I really don't love the argument. I know I think it was some Oxford professor who said it. They have a bad habit of making bad arguments sometimes.
Yeah, those terrible Oxford professors, what idiot.
But yeah,
Two guys on Substack are just going to take down the Oxford professor.
yeah. Okay, so the biggest and most like radical response to the hierarchical argument is to say that, well, maybe hierarchical regresses infinitely could actually be coherent.
Sure.
Right? So Aquinas uses this intuition or this principle that derivative causal power must ultimately reduce to non-derivative causal power. So if X has power only insofar as Y does, and Y only has power insofar as Z does, then eventually something must have power in itself. If everything was derivative.
Kind of like, like I have the power to hold up this water bottle. But okay, like what powers my hand? Well, it's like my wrist. And then what powers my wrist? Well, it's my arm. What powers that? It's my shoulder, body, so on and so forth. Like that power to hold up the water bottle is always participating in this hierarchical chain of causation.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are some good responses to this, I think. I mean, the intuition or principle sounds pretty compelling, but I don't think it's logically forced, right? So Aquinas is assuming unidirectional dependence, right? So one direction, the dependence is one directional. But there are tons of systems that like exhibit distributed or, as Joseph Rahi would have me use, relational dependence. With no privileged base, right? The dependence is distributed or relational. Like you can conceive of a network, where each node's behavior is fixed by relations to other.
Yeah.
And so nothing is really incoherent there. We have this natural assumption that dependence must bottom out in a thing rather than a structure. Like an infinite hierarchy could be self-supporting or not self-causing individually, but self-supporting structurally. And that's a bit of a complex one. So if you don't want to deal with that one, that's fine.
No, I think it's good. We can play on this for a bit. I think I see the point, or I think I see where it's kind of heading. My concern maybe is that if you say, well, okay, it's omnidirectional, right? This power is distributed.
Yeah.
It seems like and I can see that. I could see that on the scale of the universe or all of reality or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even I agree with that. But it still seems to be the case that, well, the entire set of things needs an explanatory principle. Otherwise, you've just got to posit it as being brute, which is okay, but less satisfactory than saying that there is one principle that everything else finds its explanatory terminus.
Yeah. So I guess it's going. So when I said that self-supporting,
Maybe I'm misunderstanding you.
No. I think you got it just fine. I think. But when I sort of said that the whole structure itself could be self-supporting structurally, right?
Okay.
So let's okay. This is sort of the principle. Even if each member is explained by another, the whole set still needs an explanation, right? This is sort of like I've heard about it before. It's like a principle of totality explanation, the PTE.
Yeah.
If every member of a set has an explanation, then the set itself must also have an explanation over and above the explanations of its members.
Mhm.
So, but this isn't logically forced, right? This is a metaphysical thesis, if you will.
Yeah, it's an appeal to, well, it's basically an appeal to like parsimony or like explanatory force rather than like logical necessity.
Yeah. So this is we call it the composition fallacy in explanatory form. A classic move is to say that, okay, so here's a composition inference. Each member is explained, therefore the collection as a totality needs a further explanation.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily valid, I don't think. So
Okay.
how about, so
Interesting.
every human has, yeah, so every human has a mother, right? We'll take that as premise P.
Mhm.
Does that imply, so every human has a mother, does that imply humanity has a mother?
Uh, no.
No. Okay. Every
Uh,
sentence in a book is explained. The book needs an explanation beyond its sentences. Sometimes true, but sometimes not, right?
no, I think that's always true. I think because we, well, I think maybe in the way you've explained that, you've kind of proved the principle in the sense that, like, the book, whatever the book is, if I take this fat philosophy book, um,
Right.
all of the sentences within it don't explain the entirety of the book. What explains this book was the fact that all of these people wrote these sentences onto paper and then it was published. And so there's something outside of the set of things that explains each one of the members of the set.
Sorry. Yeah. Let me rephrase. I think we're using explanation two different ways, and I'm using it a different way here.
Okay,
Um,
sure.
yeah. So the mistake is sort of treating it like there's the whole set, right? You're treating the totality as though it were an additional entity, right? But the whole set might not be, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this. This is just a response that I've heard.
Mhm.
The whole set might not be anything over and above the members plus their relations, right? If we explain
Uh,
all the members and their dependency relations, we have just explained the whole.
so the set is explanatorily complete. There's
Yes.
nothing
Yeah.
within the set left to be explained. Right, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Um yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so, like, we could say from a structural explanation that why things are the way they are is because of how the structure is configured, not necessarily from an originating source.
Hmm. Yeah, okay.
Now, I don't know. I don't think this works all that well. I think that the
Is
hierarchical
there
argument.
yeah, is there other reasons to doubt this other than kind of, again, appealing to parsimony or whatever?
Um, well, so the big thing to say is that this usually depends on assuming the principle of sufficient reason in one way or another.
Mm, right.
Um, so someone insists the totality must have an explanation, and you ask them why, and they're probably going to say, well, because everything has to have an explanation. But that's just PSR, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so you're right to say that brute totality isn't as satisfactory, and I could agree with that maybe. I think the only point is to just say that it's not incoherent.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I guess, uh, for me, like, just because it's probably starting to sound to the audience like I'm an atheist, but for me, like, God's existence is not a matter of logical necessity. I don't think any of these arguments succeed in that sense, like, they're actually deductively true, but I think at least, the last two we've discussed, the hierarchical causation and the contingency argument, um, are from the perspective of kind of like theoretical virtues like parsimony and explanatory power and coherence, that theism is a better account than atheism. But I think you're doing a really good job of showing how the atheist can still kind of like account for reality. You know, given the things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. Right. Any last words on Aquinas's second way or third way or whatever it is? I can't remember which one. I think second.
No, go read Aquinas, please. He's my
Yeah.
favorite theologian, honestly. Really.
He's incredible. Well, I don't know if he's a great theologian. He's a great philosopher.
Yeah.
I find elements of his theology quite frightening. I mean, no, I shouldn't say he's definitely not. He's definitely not a bad theologian. I shouldn't say that. That's not very humble of me.
I don't think you'll be welcome in the church.
No, well, I'm not Catholic, so it's fine.
Oh, yeah.
It's all right. I can pick and choose what I like from Aquinas, but okay, cool. What's next then?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's Anselm's ontological argument.
Boo, boo. Yeah, so
boo, yes, boo.
To give to give background, Ed and I were talking about the ontological argument the other day, and I don't like it, but I can't. I think a lot of people feel this way about the ontological argument at some point, where they're like, it doesn't. I don't think it works, but I can't tell you why, because I think it's a really, really hard argument to demonstrate why it's unsound. So the argument is something like, well, if you try and conceive of a maximally great being, the most conceivably maximally great being that you can, and you've got that in your mind, what would make that being better if that being was actually instantiated in reality? Because if it only exists in your mind, it isn't maximally great. So a maximally great being would exist in reality as well as existing in your mind. Is that a fair? Maybe that was a bad articulation of it, but is that a fair summation?
No, I think that's just fine. Yeah.
So if I say
Mhm.
I imagine a really great island, and that this island's it's wicked, man. Like there's partying, there's drinking, but responsible drinking. Everyone's just having a great time, man. That island would be better if it existed in reality rather than just in my mind.
Mhm.
Why does that not work as an objection?
So, to me, this really sounds like what very similar to the greatest conceivable unicorn. All right.
Yeah.
There's a similar argument against the ontological argument. And it's to say similar to what he's saying is that, I have this really great unicorn in my mind, and, what about I could just define this unicorn into existence.
Mhm.
And it's a similar, I think the response is similar to the island, where we say that, well, you've limited your scope, right? You have this unicorn, and you've made it the greatest unicorn, maybe longer horn, greater mane, maybe it's more pink than all the others, and that's fine. But you could make this unicorn a greater thing, a greater being, right? We could sort of say, okay, well, now we just give it omnipotence, we give it omniscience, omnibenevolent, things like that. I think there's a similar response, which is to the island, and it's like, okay, you have this island, and it's great, and maybe it would be better if it existed in real life, or maybe it would be better if it existed in real life, and so now this island really exists. I think there's a couple of issues right there. I think it's disanalogous, because of the contingent nature of islands, right, under theism. I'm not going to say that's true under atheism, but the contingent nature of islands, and the necessary nature of God. I think there's going to be a disanalogy there, because so God sort of has to exist by definition, necessarily. Well, if he does exist, he exists necessarily in all possible worlds.
Mhm.
And so we sort of say, okay, well, maybe I start from the assumption that he doesn't, but I still have to take on this definition. And it's to say that if I can conceive of him being real, and that possibly existence is a great making property of this thing, right? And he already necessarily exists. Well, then existence does make him greater because he can affect the well, no, that's not. A better way to put it is contingent, right? Is something that could fail to exist.
Mhm.
Failing to exist seems just intuitively like a worse making property. I don't think that's how Anselm would put it, but a worse making property. Existence appears to be a great making property because, well, I have this great thing in mind, and it's God, right? We'll just call it God. And he's got, omnipotence, omnibenevolence, and, he necessarily exists. And if I were to make him contingent and say that he fails to exist, well, this would not only A, contradict the definition, but B, seem to make him less great than he would be should he exist in all possible worlds. Now, I want to be clear to everybody watching, I do not think the ontological argument works. I just
Yeah.
like it. I just like it.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun. Well, we'll get to your objection in a second, but I want to ask some clarifying questions because
Go ahead.
what makes according to Anselm, what makes something a great making property? Because in classical theism, the so-called, omni-properties or whatever are basically like downstream from basically divine simplicity. So you start with divine simplicity, then you do a conceptual analysis, and then you pop out these attributes. But it seems like Anselm begins this tradition of like perfect being theology, where basically like God is just a being with all the great making properties. From Anselm's perspective, because it seems to me that the great making properties are subjective value judgments. Because in my island, for example, like I might think it's great if there's a free bar on my island, but then someone who doesn't like alcohol might think if it's better if no one was drinking on this island, right? So at least in that case, it seems like what makes something great or good is a completely subjective value judgment.
Okay, yeah. I think we talked about this actually. So we have to work a bit back here. Ontology, right? Is what shit is, as Ish would have it, right? It's the study of being. It is what things are. What is, right?
Yeah.
To say that something has ontology is to say that it has a being, or to say that it is, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
For Anselm, he is going to say that a great making property is something that makes something ontologically better. Now, okay, better is an evaluative term. I can hear the objection already, right? A better is an evaluative term. It's a psychological report about what you conceive as being more to your preferences. That's fine. We can just say that it is, we can say that it is ontologically greater, not in the evaluative sense of, oh, well, I just like it more if it was X, but it has more ontology, right? Something, yeah, right. Something, it has more ontology, it has more being. And these are going to be the great making properties, quote unquote. Because, okay, yeah, so I'm sorry, I missed this. When he's saying the greatest conceivable being, if you automatically interpret that as sort of saying, well, I would just prefer this thing to exist, or I would like it if this thing exists, or this thing has properties that I prefer, then I think that starting assumption is going against what Anselm is saying. He is saying greatest conceivable being in terms of an ontological sense, like greatest ontologically. It has more ontology, right? And maybe this fits under idealism. He encompasses the whole world, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
Exactly. So everything is encompassed within God's ontology under idealism. So that would be the greatest conceivable. Maybe Anselm was making an argument for idealism.
Maybe he was. Yeah.
But so yeah, he's saying greatest, not in a psychological report, but in a ontologically speaking. What are the properties that we can assign to this thing, to this being? that it either increase its ontology or things like that, right? And so he gets omnipotence, omnibenevolence, all of that, whatever it is. And then he gets to, well, does it exist? Well, if it doesn't exist, then you have less ontology. If it does exist, you have a greater ontological being. So I think I just didn't catch that assumption, and that's my bad.
No, that's great. That's perfect, because he's basically saying that, like, a being that exists in reality is greater qua being, but an island that exists in reality is not necessarily greater qua island. Is that a fair thing to say?
And I think even if we took it as sort of like a psychological report, I think I heard this one. I think it was Joe Schmidt who made this argument. Was like the island could actually just be better in my mind. I could, you could be there, and I could be there in my mind, and maybe it would have the same experiential feeling as actually being there. And you could be there, and all my friends could be there, and
Sure,
I could, things like that. Like if we treat it as a psychological report, we do get arbitrary. A little bit, but I don't think Anselm wanted that to be a psychological report. I think he was talking about ontologically speaking.
Okay, great. So save me, Ed. Why does the ontological argument actually fail? Well, maybe no. I mean, I want it. I'm a theist, so if it succeeds, great. But why doesn't it?
Great. All right. So this goes back to Immanuel Kant. All right, and this does get into the logic side of things. So I don't know how versed you are in that, but
not a lot. So you'll have to walk me through it like I'm 5, as my
problem would say. No problem. So Immanuel Kant's objection to Anselm is to say that existence simply isn't a predicate.
Okay.
Do you know what a predicate is?
It's a way of describing something.
Yeah, contributes content or properties to a concept, tells you what the thing is like, right?
Yeah.
So X is red, the predicate is red, and X is the atomic, or I guess it's the whatever it's called. The predicate is red, or the predicate is tall, or has 4 legs, things like that. If I list predicates of a thing, I'm building its concepts. I'm saying what properties it has.
Mm-hmm. So
adding a predicate changes the description of the thing.
Yeah.
So he says, well, existence just doesn't behave like that. Now, so compare like 100 real dollars versus 100 imagined dollars. Conceptually, they are identical. Same number, same denominations, same purchasing power in the concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing about the idea of the money changes when you say it exists. The difference is not in the content of the concept, but whether the concept is instantiated. So Kant's claim is to say that existence doesn't add a property to the concept of a thing, it just posits that the thing is instantiated in reality. And so Anselm needs the step that a being that exists is greater than one that does not. And Kant is saying, well, no, you're making a category mistake. You have a concept plus instantiation to a concept without instantiation. But that's not a comparison within the concept. Existence doesn't make the thing greater. It just makes the thing instantiated. And being real is not a predicate of the thing, but a claim about the world.
Okay.
So, in terms of logic here, we could say, all right, so Anselm we do not say that X has the property of existence. That's implicit in X. Existence is handled by a quantifier, not a predicate, right? So we say, do you know what a quantifier is?
No, you'll have to explain it to me.
Okay, so we have the existential quantifier, right? The existential quantifier is like a backwards E. It's just to say there exists at least one, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a universal quantifier.
This thing exists rather than not existing.
Yeah. So greatest. How many puppies are in this? Sorry, I just saw the chat. Fuck, what was I saying? Right. So, like the greatest example is Bertrand Russell's "The Present King of France is bald." Right.
Yeah.
And how do we say no to that? How do we negate that? Well, we don't say the present king of France is not bald.
Yeah.
Because now we're saying there's a present king of France, but there isn't one.
Yeah.
Right? And so what we would say is, logically formulated, there does not exist one king such that he is the king of France, and this king of France is bald. So there does not exist at least one. And there does not exist one, right? And so in modern logic, we wouldn't say X has the property of existence. We would say there exists an X using the quantifier. There exists at least one X such that X is F, right? Existence is handled by the quantifier. It's not a predicate.
Yeah.
So Kant wants to say, okay, well, predicates apply to objects. Existence quantifies over objects. So when you say God exists, you haven't added a property. You're saying there is something that satisfies the God concept, and that's a whole different claim than God exists.
Yeah.
And so this is where the greatest conceivable unicorn sort of comes in. Kant says, suppose I define a unicorn as a horse-like creature with a horn that exists. Have I succeeded? No. All I've done is build existence into the description, and I've shown something. I haven't shown that anything even satisfies it. The concept includes existence, but that doesn't conjure an instantiation. So Kant just wants to say you don't get existence for free, no matter how rich a concept is.
Yeah. No, yeah, okay, I like that. Are we going to run into problems here, though? Because I think there is a difference between saying something that exists in the mind and exists in reality. So something, saying something that exists as a concept in my mind versus something that, the concept being instantiated in reality is a different thing. And it seems to me that is a way of describing what's going on in reality. It might not be a predicate as such, but there is this distinction there. So can you play on that distinction?
Could you expand a little bit on that for me?
So, like, I'm shooting from the hip here. I'm trying to play devil's advocate because I love everything you just said, but so you're saying that when you give a predicate of something, you're already assuming that it exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we say exists, it seems like we're equivocating. Okay. Because if we say that it exists in the mind or as a concept, that's a different thing as saying that concept is instantiated in reality.
So saying it exists as a concept is different from saying it exists in reality.
Because it seems you can predicate that something exists in reality versus in the mind.
Can you give me an example?
Well, let's go back to the unicorn.
Okay.
If I imagine a unicorn, the unicorn exists. It has some level of existence because it exists as a concept in my mind. I can imagine it. But unicorns don't exist in reality.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So, yeah, I think this is going to lead to an equivocation on existence, and which is why I think. Actually, no, I don't think this is a problem. I think Anselm would just say that you're right, but in reality would have more existence than existence in your mind, right? I think he would just say, sure, maybe both of them have this thing called existence, and they exist, but the thing that exists in reality exists both in reality and in your mind, rather than just in your mind. So it has more existence.
Yeah, but doesn't that undermine using existence in this binary sense, that you're using it in, or how Kant is using it in logic as a quantifier?
Does it undermine the existence quantifier in logic? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe. And so, okay. Well, no, I don't think so. So if we say that it exists in reality, right? If we get to God exists in reality, And by definition of him, he is necessary, right? Then we just have to use the universal quantifier and say, yeah, see.
Okay.
So I don't think it does. I think there exists at least one versus the universal quantifier is going to, I think, bridge that gap, I think, yeah. I don't think it will undermine the use of the existential quantifier being there exists some, or at least one. Yeah, do you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. Okay, good. I can sleep tonight because Anselm's ontological argument does not work.
Well,
All right,
you know,
cool. Yeah, any final words on ontological argument, or?
No, but I do want to, I want to try and save it for Ish, see if I can get a coffee out of it now.
Okay. Cool. What's next?
My least favorite. Okay. We have the teleological argument.
Okay, teleological arguments. Something like, if I find a watch, if I'm walking on a beach and I find a watch, the level of complexity in that watch makes me infer some sort of design from this watch and some sort of purpose for this watch. And then if we look at the universe and all of reality, it seems so complex. Like, how could have this all come to be through chance? There must be some sort of intelligent design behind it. Is that a fair summation?
Yes, that is good. That is
Okay,
very good.
cool. Why is this bad?
So, there are two really different.
Hang on. Are there any strengths to this argument first? I skipped over
Yeah,
the
I
strengths.
mean,
Oh no, there's not going to be any strengths. But are there strengths to this argument?
yeah,
Intuitively.
definitely intuitively, but we disagree upon what intuitions play as a role in
Oh, no,
philosophy.
yeah, okay.
So, but just intuitively speaking, yeah, the watchmaker argument really does appeal to aesthetic intuitions, right? And just everyday observable, empirical observations, right? You see a painting, right? And regardless of its beauty or anything, you would still assume that the painting has a painter or something from which intelligent design brought it about.
Yeah.
Even more so from when you see like the Sistine Chapel, right? You see that and you're like, God, it's a fantastic fact that somehow we were intelligent enough to design this, right? You infer intelligent design all the time from especially from things with complexity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the core argument is essentially that the universe exhibits order and apparent purpose, and the best explanation for this is an intelligent designer. Now, there are two different versions of this argument. There is sort of the probabilistic argument, which is a more modern formulation,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have the sort of you might call intuition probabilistic, but I think there's a difference, and the more classical one is going to be more an intuitive slash this has the most explanatory power, right?
Yeah.
So I think it has a lot of strengths, of course. Yeah, intuitively. I think it has a lot of weaknesses too, though. And the easiest way to do this is to take it as an empirical claim, sort of, or to use an empirical claim against it, which is
Mm-hmm.
to say that we see apparent design that arises from natural processes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think there might be a decent argument to say against that from the theist, which is to say, well, yeah, but those natural processes were intelligently designed, right? But I think that sort of begs the question.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So if we just take a neutral position here and sort of say, okay, well, we see apparent design from natural processes that aren't necessarily intelligently designed, then it sort of counts against that in a probabilistic manner, right? Like if random natural selection can produce apparent design, then that counts against the fact that an intelligent designer is the best explanation, right? You could also say that the analogy is sort of weak. The universe is pretty disanalogous from an artifact, like a watch, right?
Mhm.
And there's the puddle response, sort of, which is to say, like, we observe order because we exist. Had we not existed, there would be no order to observe. That's kind of garbage, but
Yeah, I don't think that works either.
no. But and I think there just are a lot of, like, it strikes me as an empirical claim to say that the watch, implies, or you can infer intelligent design from it. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, okay, fine. But also, there are other empirical situations in which we observe randomness generating design or apparent
Mhm.
design,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, I think this one is sort of like Pascal's wager, where it's supposed to be supporting, it should be a supporting argument if you already believe in God, but it does not itself get you anywhere close.
Yeah, it's certainly not a deductive argument, or doesn't run as a deductive argument.
Mm,
But
well,
I think it's even. I think the situation's even worse, because if you take it as an empirical claim, the if you can give a reductionist explanation of how apparent complexity can emerge out of simpler mechanistic processes, then it seems to me that you have sufficiently explained that complexity. Um, because this is why you know, some people think that evolution undermines um, Christianity in various ways. Because it's
mhm,
like, well, if we can give a naturalistic, reductionistic explanation, then we have removed this the argument relies on this like air of mystery. That's kind of like, ooh, this ooh feeling, like, oh, y- if we find this really complex thing, it's like, oh, it's like mysterious how it got there, if there wasn't a mind behind it or whatever. Um, but if there wasn't, if we can give this reductionist account, and we can explain how over millions of years this simple process can lead to complexity, um, then uh, we've kind of solved the problem. And I think looking at the watch is kind of the issue with using examples like a watch is that we we know a watch is something that is well, created by humans, but there's plenty of complexity in nature that humans had no involvement in, that um, are equally like amazing, but aren't used for the argument because they don't have that same sort of intuitive force as something like a watch does.
yeah. And so my biggest problem with something like the classical formulation of this, which is to say that, oh, well, you know, an intelligent designer has the most explanatory power.
Mhm.
You've kind of already assumed the conclusion here, which
Mhm.
is to say that, okay, well, we have, if we in principle could even have a naturalistic and reductionistic explanation for something like the watch, or just anything, the universe, right? If we have this naturalistic explanation, to say that, okay, well, that's fine, but it's more plausible that an intelligent designer brought this about. Well,
Mhm.
there are two things. A, that seems to me more like a report about your psychology. You find it more plausible. That's fine. But in a
Yeah.
probabilistic sense, or even in like an explanatory sense, what gives it more explanatory power? I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah.
B, it only has more explanatory power. The only way I can conceive of it having more explanatory power is if you presume that something else in the observable universe has that intelligent design, right? It only seems to me to work that if you say that these naturalistic processes produce complex behaviors, that it's more explanatorily useful to say that an intelligent designer brought this about, if you assume that the naturalistic processes were themselves naturally designed or intelligently designed.
Mhm.
It's the only way I see you getting more explanatory power,
Mhm.
and that just seems to assume the conclusion.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Cool.
Great. All right, we've knocked that one down.
That
All
was fairly
the
easy. Cool. What's next on the list?
So we already covered really irreducible complexity in the
Sure. Yeah.
teleological argument. So I actually put consciousness arguments / idealist arguments for God.
Well, this is my favorite.
Yeah, I
Uh,
couldn't have guessed.
we have arrived. Yeah, so there's different ways you can run this argument, but this is basically the main reason that I am some version of a theist, which is to say that obviously you're going to have to establish the truth of something like idealism or panpsychism.
Yeah, but let's just take it for granted.
So let's just use our idealism for the sake of simplicity, because that's what I am. So you establish the truth of some form of idealism, and you say that therefore if all of reality is composed of consciousness, therefore all of reality is like a mind in some analogous sense to the way that we are a mind. And if we do enough conceptual analysis, that mind is going to look something rather like God.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically how I would run an argument for theism. And yeah, obviously you're going to have to do loads and loads of groundwork to establish why idealism is more likely to be true than not. But yeah, that's the basic idea. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this, Ed? Now I'm
So yeah, I mean, like if I just take idealism for granted, right? If I just take it as an assumption and I work with it,
yeah.
yeah, I don't have a whole lot of problems with getting to God, and I think there are a lot of ways you can do it. You told me, I think it was Berkeley, that you didn't like in terms of his candle argument for God.
Yeah, I think Berkeley's version of idealism has a few holes, whereas kind of I'm an objective idealist. So basically, I disagree with Berkeley's whole idea that to be is to be perceived.
Okay, I see.
So I think particular phenomena exist independent of like any given subject's perception of it. Apart with the exception of God being obviously all of reality, and so
Right.
his perception, if we can even use that language, is exhaustive. But any particular limited finite subject, things exist independent of their perception of it, whereas Berkeley would say that isn't the case.
Okay, I'm gonna push a little bit here. Okay, so there are certain things that exist independent of any subject's perception of it, right? Or at least any finite subject's perception of it.
Yeah.
What about color? Is color within your within that?
Yeah, the particular way that we experience color as human beings. Different animals experience colors differently. They have a broader range of, like lobsters can see like different, like a much wider variety of the color spectrum that we can. So color as such as an abstract principle, no, but the particular way that we as humans experience color, yes.
Okay, yeah, no, like as a predicate, I mean, just there is a color to this thing. Like the tree is brown. Let's not even go brown. The tree has a color, right? Color
Well,
is,
yeah, I think that would be dependent on some sort of finite subject, sure.
okay, so that doesn't exist. That's not an independent phenomena of us.
No, because so the phenomena exists, but the appearance is dependent on us.
Okay, so the phenomena of color is still predicated on that tree, right? Obviously, we interpret it in different ways, but the color itself, as a phenomenon, still exists on that tree.
No.
No. Okay, so color does not fit within that,
Right.
within your category there of that. Okay. I'm not Alex, of course, but I'm trying to see how this squares with local realism. Of course, I don't know if you guys have discussed that.
I don't know. We're talking about Alex, isn't our friend Left Brain Mystic, for
Yes.
the viewers. My view overlaps with him a little bit, but we have a few differences. I would take a much more of a top-down approach than he would.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't have a whole lot of problems with getting from, if we take idealism as an assumption, to God. I quite like Berkeley's candle thing. I don't like Berkeley as a whole in terms of his idealism, but um, for the people listening, the candle thing it was an objection to Berkeley's idealism, which is to say, okay, well, if I light this candle and I walk out of the room and I come back, well, the candle is burned. It's burned down to
Yeah.
its wick. So clearly, at some point between my observing it and my coming back, the candle existed independent of my observation. And Berkeley uses this and he says, well, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. But all you've proven there is that there exists something which is perceiving everything all at the same time, all the time. And that for Berkeley is God. I quite like that. That argument for God. I'd have to be an idealist, but
Yeah, I think it's good. I don't share Berkeley's assumptions, that background assumption. But I think it works.
yeah,
As an
definitely.
you need it in order for his system to work. You need an omni-perceiver, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's not quite how I would go about things, but yeah, I think it also works. I think it's hard to say how it doesn't, but
Yeah. So I don't have a problem with idealist arguments for God. I just have a problem with idealism. So,
yeah, sure, yeah. Obviously, all of this rests on a very controversial idea that idealism is true.
yeah. So
Which,
let's step over to like regular consciousness arguments.
yeah,
Um, and if you have if there's any interesting idealist insights to these, then please let me know.
yeah, sure, yeah.
So, oh yeah, well, there's this really interesting one actually that I heard, and it comes from mereological nihilism.
Okay.
Do you know what that is?
Yes, yeah, but do you mind explaining it for the listener, actually?
Yeah.
In
So
case.
mereology is a study of parts. Nihilism is to say that something doesn't exist when it's used as a modifier. So mereological nihilism is just to say that parts as distinct things don't exist. So I have a table, right, and you could sort of like conceptually separate it into legs and its flat top, and maybe even like the stumps at the bottom of the thing that don't scratch your floor. But this is sort of an abstract conceptual analysis in our minds, and that doesn't get you to, well, the parts actually exist. But if we take mereological nihilism just as an assumption, right, there is this argument to say that, okay, well, premise one, material things aren't distinct. Like material parts, material things generally aren't distinct.
Yeah.
Premise two, minds are really distinct. My mind is distinct from your mind, right?
Yeah.
Premise three, or I think it might be conclusion. Conclusion, or minds aren't material.
Yeah.
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 Conclusion, minds are material. They are immaterial. And this is sort of how you get to God for some people. This is how you get, well, okay, we've posited this immaterial thing, and we need some way to like explain or justify this. And some people just throw God into their ontology for that.
Yeah, I think it strikes me as a very God of the Gaps move, because it's kind of like, well, we have this thing that we're not really sure how it works, and like therefore God, and I'm just a bit like, I think there are cleaner ways to do it, but there we go.
Idealism
But
for starters. Yeah.
well, yes, idealism for starters. But yeah, because obviously that argument's going to rest on a whole bunch of assumptions that are going to be problematic.
Yeah.
But to me, it kind of just works as an argument for dualism um, rather than God theism.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So
I do have quite a big problem with it, which is what you were expressing. And it's most widely applied to the interaction problem, right?
mhm,
Which is to say that, so we have this immaterial mind and we have this material brain. We'll call it brain. So mind is referred to as the immaterial and brain is referred to as the material. And it's like, well, clearly one is affecting the other, right? My mind is somehow affecting my brain, and my brain also affects my mind, right? There must be some causal mechanism that gets me from whatever is going on in my mind to the physical states in my brain. And clearly, if I, poke or stab your brain, your consciousness is affected, right?
Yeah.
So the interaction problem is like, well, what's the mechanism? What's the causal mechanism that gets you from immaterial to material? How do they affect each other? And some people just throw in, well, a lot of people actually just throw in God to say this, or if we already assume God, they'll say, well, God explains this. I don't think so. You've given nothing. It doesn't explain anything.
No, it doesn't. I completely agree. It doesn't explain. It might explain why all of those laws function in the way that they do, in some sort of ultimate grounded sense. But you haven't actually explained any mechanism, or you haven't given any mechanism whatsoever.
Yeah.
You're basically you may as well say, like the interaction problem, therefore magic.
Exactly. Yeah.
You, you haven't done anything.
So odd to just say that. Well, I know you asked for a mechanism, but here, take this personal deity, and the problem goes away. Not quite, because I still need the mechanism by which this comes about, and it just isn't there.
Yeah, which I guess is my problem with all God of the Gaps arguments, because you can't plug holes in the natural world with God. Because also that does mean if we've explained everything through the natural sciences, then there's no need for God anymore.
Exactly,
which
limitivist.
On the face of it. So, because it would be way simpler just to postulate that there are these metaphysical laws that we can't observe somehow that explain the interaction.
Yeah.
But instead, you're going to add all of this rather large deity to your metaphysical theory, which has all sorts of downstream implications rather than just keeping with this big of explanation, or going for a form of monism, which is way more preferable in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well. Yeah. You don't think so?
So, even the bigger problem is even if I grant you that somehow you've given me some explanatory model or thesis for how we get from immaterial to material. The point is these are supposed to be arguments either in favor of or for the existence of God, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you may have closed the explanatory gap with this positing of God, but you have not closed a metaphysical gap at all.
Yeah.
I mean, there still exists that, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Adding God as an entity to your theory has not given a mechanism for how these two things interact at all. So,
exactly.
I think that's rubbish. I don't like that.
Cool. All right. Well, God, there's thousands of years of philosophy and theology down the drain.
Yeah, there we go.
We did that.
We've done it. Cool. Have we got any left?
We have two important ones left, really.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
We could do. You want to do Pascal's wager? There's been a bit of controversy on that. Yeah. Okay.
Pascal's wager. Yeah. So, actually, do you want to take this one? Because it's been a long time since I've looked at it, so I'm gonna butcher it if I explain that thing.
Yeah. So, easy, simplistic way of going about it is you could sort of formulate this in a sort of expected value type of argument, which is to say that there are way more negative consequences should you disbelieve in God, rather than taking the metaphysical gamble and saying or believing that God exists. Now, I have a lot of problems with this, but it is just to say that in terms of expected value, you gain nothing if you don't believe in God, except being right, I guess, maybe. I value that a lot,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Whereas there are so many metaphysical and just practical implications and things that you gain should you actually believe in God. So you just gain more believing in God. You gain practically nothing from not believing in God. And this is if you end up being right. If you're wrong, I mean, both sides really don't gain much. But if you're wrong about it and you don't believe, you have essentially lost the gamble and gone to hell. So
I think this is a wild argument.
yeah,
It it seems to have built into it so many problematic assumptions. It's hard to even know where to begin. Do you think there are any strengths to it?
I do, because and it was weird. So Amos Wallen, who was another philosophy substacker, sort of pushed me on this for some reason, which was I said that Pascal never intended for it to be an argument. He intended it for it to be a supporting idea for people who already believed, and that it should never ever convince anybody to believe in God. And he
Yeah.
was sort of like, "Well, yeah, but nobody treats it like that." And I was like, "I'm seeing people treat it like that all over the place.
Mm.
I'm seeing people treat it as a knockdown argument in favor of God."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "No, but if you already believe in God and you see that there are metaphysical consequences for not believing in him, and you already have that belief, then yeah, that should support you to believe him even more from a pragmatic sense, you know."
Yeah.
But outside of that, no. I see no strengths.
Yeah, it seems super problematic. I mean, firstly, I have problems with the idea of eternal damnation
Yeah,
in the first
well,
place. I think, I mean, we can spend a very long time going through the theological issues, but just prima facie, that seems at
yeah,
least in tension with God's omnibenevolence. So that's a
absolutely.
problem. That's a problem of out of the gates.
Yep.
Then the other problem is that the assumption that if you don't believe in God, you're almost guaranteed to go to hell,
Mhm.
which is certainly um, not well. It's a mainstream Christian belief nowadays, but not historically.
No.
The deciding factor for most people was not assenting to the proposition God exists or not. It had all sorts to do with how you live your life, etc., etc., um, and
Yeah,
also belonging to particular churches and this kind of stuff.
of
And
course.
so, um, the idea that not only there is eternal damnation, but that God sends you there like de facto if you don't believe in him is another problematic assumption. It also seems to assume the truth of Christianity because you should be able to run this argument for any religion.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and not clear to me that we should favor, um, you know, if we're working on this very a priori basis, it doesn't seem any reason for me why we should favor the Christian model over other models, or the Christian conception of God over others. Um, so there's just so many assumptions baked into this argument that I think
If-
are problematic.
Yeah, my primary assumption is even if we assume that the argument works, that if we assume that it is an argument and that it works, um, is to say that there's a psychological contradiction here, and I'm not sure how you could even possibly resolve it. If I tell you that for the next year you have to live as though you believe the FBI are spying on you in your house, at any point throughout that, are you going to start to believe that the FBI is spying on you in your house?
Yeah, well, maybe you would. I don't know.
Well, I suppose if you had some sort of mental or cognitive ailment, you
Yeah,
might. But if I told you to believe there was an ogre outside of your door right now, and for the next
yeah,
week you had to live as such, at any point are you going to start to believe that? No, because that's not how beliefs work. We can't choose to assent to a proposition. We can't choose our beliefs as such. I mean, that's a free will sort of thing as well. But I
yeah.
mean,
But
you
what's a big? Sorry, go on, go on.
you simply there is no capacity for us to choose to simply believe in God. You
Yeah,
could an atheist could spend the rest of his life going to church, listening to religious worship songs, and going to church every day, reading the Bible every day, things like that, and never get to to affirming the proposition God exists. It simply would never happen. It could in principle, and in practice never happen.
Yeah.
And the wager will have failed because
Yeah.
there's just no psychological mechanism to get you that way, necessarily speaking.
But it also seems like psychologically disastrous, because you could run a Pascal's wager that you should never leave the house, for example.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I can say, well, if you leave the house, there are all sorts of like dangerous things you might encounter, and the consequence of that could be death. But if you stay in the house, probabilistically, you're more likely to survive. Therefore, you should always stay in your house because you're less likely to die. And it's like, well, that's just anxiety. That's not
Right. Yeah.
that isn't a rational way to live your life.
Right.
And we pathologize people who live their lives that way.
Yes.
But there seems to be this weird psychological underpinnings that, it's problematic.
Yeah, so the biggest thing, actually, I think, is with this. I think there's an issue with the calculus of expected value.
Okay,
I
yeah,
think
are we going to get some Bayesian probabilities going on here?
hopefully not, dear God. But I think that it's just a big problem with expected value as maybe not as a practical mechanism, but as a general way of going about what we think different propositions have a probabilistic chance of being correct are. Actually, I think it is a pragmatic issue as well. I saw Lance Bush, actually, just earlier, restack a post that said something like, if I assign a 0.01% chance that my wish will come true if I throw a coin into a wishing well, then I should believe that, right? Because of the expected value of that, I should absolutely believe that my wish will come true if I throw it into a wishing well, if I throw a coin into a wishing well. And Lance Bush was like, this would be a pretty good reductio ad absurdum. And I think that's a fantastic example of how expected value, I think it might work in certain cases, but I think as a general principle is absolute garbage. Even in ethical calculus, I think that's a bad way of going about it. Peter Singer, of course, right, is this big expected value, effective altruist type guy. And I think that, I think that, like, there are just going to be ethical situations and edge cases in which expected value produces an absurd conclusion from which we would just intuitively say, no, that is ethically wrong, morally wrong, etc. Boo that. It's just not a good way of doing things, I don't think.
No, I agree, and I think that's one of my biggest problems with utilitarianism as a broad moral philosophy, is that it seems like pragmatically it's bad, but also expected value seems like incalculable. Like, it seems very, very hard to quantify and calculate expected value, and so it doesn't work for me on either level.
Yeah, the biggest problem with it is it assumes sort of like a standardized quantification or like a, how do I say this? A unit of something, a unit of value. And
Like, what's one expected value?
Yeah, it's like, it was the shrimp thing. The biggest thing was the shrimp thing on Substack, which was like,
let's not wade into that controversy.
But just essentially, we were equivocating on like the value of shrimp consciousness versus human consciousness. It's like, what is a unit of value of consciousness?
Yeah,
exactly. I do not think it is a good way of going about anything, except maybe in certain pragmatic cases.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Have we got any left?
The last one's the fine-tuning.
Last one's the fine-tuning. Okay. So, fine-tuning, there are laws of physics or laws about, or things that, laws of reality that we observe that are life-permitting, but they fall into a very, very, very incredibly extreme narrow range to allow for the formation of life, or even the formation of anything at all, really. And if they were even a tiny bit different, then gravity wouldn't be a thing and nothing would have formed. essentially. Basically, reality would have just crumbled or expanded so fast that no atoms would have formed. So obviously, all of those things did happen, and the chance that it happened, the prior probability for that is so ridiculously low. There must have been a God who fine-tuned the laws of physics to allow for reality to unfold in the way it has done so.
Yeah. Fantastic. That is a very good summation of that.
What do you think about it? I think it's got some intuitive force. I think again, like it's similar to teleological arguments. It seems like when you first encountered this, you're like, even Christopher Hitchens thought it's a good argument. Quite famously, there's the video of him like drunk in a car saying, well,
yeah, I saw that.
It's something you've got to think about. So yeah, I mean, I think at first it does give you a pause. You're like, wow, like that is a very, very narrow range. Like it's I don't know anything about physics, but I can tell you the numbers. But it's like if it was like 0.5 different, then reality wouldn't have even existed at all. The universe wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do we think about this?
So I have a lot of issues with the fine-tuning argument. I do think that intuitively, yeah, it has great force. Of course, you mentioned Christopher Hitchens, and yeah, one of the greatest arguments ever postulated for the existence of God in some people's opinions. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good one. It's like top 5, maybe for me, maybe 6. But I think there are just a lot of problems with the terminology we're using. The intuitive force, in my opinion, comes from this probabilistic or this less probable or narrow. The biggest problem I have is with the narrow, right? Narrow and less probable, right? What are these terms? Well, these are probabilistic terms, sort of. The narrow is like in reference to the values, and probabilistic is like, but what are we doing when we say something is less probable? Well, it's a comparative term. What are we comparing to? We have no set to compare to, right? So we have this universe. We have never observed another universe in which the values were like either the same or wildly different, such that it existed or didn't exist. There is no comparative standard, right? And yet we're using these empirical terms. We're using terms such as probable, less probable, narrow. Narrow in comparison to what? Sure, there's like maybe you could make an argument for some objective feature of narrow because it rests in between this number and that number. And I have a problem because like the theists will say to expected value stuff when they talk about Pascal's wager, they'll say, oh, well, you say even just a 0.01% chance, and it's like, well, there are tons of numbers in between 0.01 and 0.02. Like there's such a vast amount of numbers, right? It's not actually a small chance at all. Well, then in what meaningful sense is it a small chance to say that because this number is super duper narrow in between these two possible values, in what meaningful way is that a small chance then? Mm-hmm. You can't have it both ways. And yeah, the empirical problem is obviously you just have no comparative standard. This universe exists with values such that they are narrow, but narrow compared to who, what, when, why, or where. We have no observable universe that is like slightly tuned upwards with the gravity to see that's like all humans got crushed there. Well, we can't do that.
Could we not run models though? Because I think part of the argument is that, well, we kind of know what would happen if it had been slightly different, because we can run like physical models of this stuff.
That's going to depend on what you say by no, or what you mean by no. I mean, so like if you want to take the fine tuning as to say that, well, the best explanation is probably God for this sort of thing, and you want to base that off of models, yeah, that's probably fine. I mean, you'd still have like. This wouldn't be a knockdown argument for God, and I think it would certainly lower its status. Sorry, as a like the huge biggest argument for God. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're just basing it off models, and we have no actual empirical observation to compare, these values to, I just don't think it's a great argument. It seems still to me just like the teleological argument. And
Well, I would push back on this slightly, because we there are lots of theoretical things that we do, um, in science. But before we understood how space time could fold and stuff, um, Newton postulated this force called gravity,
mhm,
right? That at a different distance, and there was never any. I mean, it turns out that gravity doesn't really exist as a force that acts as a distance, but um, there's no way of empirically observing gravity, but you nonetheless observe its effects. And so physics postulates theoretical entities all the time that we have no direct empirical access to, but nonetheless we have to model them as if these things exist.
yeah.
Um,
So
and
I would.
and I think a lot of well, at least scientific realists would say, well, these things do exist because they have to exist, otherwise our models won't work.
Mhm. Well, yeah. So right there, what you said. Otherwise, our models won't work. That to me seems like an instrumental explanation, rather than one that attempts to like ground all of reality and say that it seems to be different to say that okay, I have this thing called gravity, and I'm postulating it because I need to explain this thing in order for my mathematical models to work.
Mhm.
Newton, of course, famously, when asked what gravity was, a hypothesis non fringo. I frame
I
no
don't know, man.
hypothesis. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I have no clue.
yeah,
But it does this thing, and I'm using this word to refer to these effects, right? Because pragmatically or practically speaking, it allows for my mathematical models to work.
yeah,
And so that seems a slightly different endeavor or a slightly different explanation to me than to say that okay, well, like if we just didn't have this explanation, then you can't explain all of reality. And because we have these other, do you sort of see what I'm saying? I'm sort of terribly phrasing it, I think. Um,
yeah.
like if we got rid of gravity, sure, our models wouldn't work, but you couldn't posit that as completely like disassembling all of reality and that nothing could exist. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I do see what you're saying, and to be clear, I'm going to annoy people. I'm a scientific anti-realist, and so I don't think theoretical entities exist. Um, but I think they would say that because we know our models do work about our current reality, we can rerun the maths, we can rerun the program with things being slightly differently, and then we could uh, mathematically predict what the effects would be, and we know mathematically that atoms wouldn't form, for example,
mhm.
if the
So
numbers had been
then,
slightly
yeah, my second response to that would be that we have no evidence because our models are not complex enough to say that if we just rearranged a bunch of the numbers in such different ways that a universe still could not form, right? We have the
different.
evidence that, like, okay, we might have evidence from models. I don't actually know if we have models complex enough to show this, but we might have evidence that if we adjusted like the strong nuclear force slightly, that the universe collapses or something like that.
Yeah,
What we don't, and I don't think in principle could even have evidence of, is to say that if I adjusted all of these values to some random number, that in principle a universe couldn't work or bring about
yeah.
life.
No, that's certainly true, and I think I hear everything that you said. My biggest issue is that it assumes that God was somehow like limited to some prior range of like mathematical uh truths.
Mhm.
Um like saying that God fine-tuned it to be a specific way, otherwise it wouldn't have worked, assumed that like the like I don't know, God is bound by like mathematical truths that are like logically prior to him, which seems
Yeah.
a bit weird.
Well, you know, it that kind of goes to the stone paradox thing. Like, how
It
do you
does,
conceive
yeah,
of omnipotence?
yeah,
Yeah, like how do you?
yeah. I mean, like I I have a less strong understanding of omnipotence as that than some theists do. Um, but I would say that the reason God can't um do things that are logically impossible is because logic is downstream of God's nature. What we understand to be logic is ontologically grounded in God's nature rather than any external external constraints acting upon God.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's possible that it would have been logically impossible for the laws of physics to have been different, but yet the universe still formed. But that seems problematic. Well, I don't see any evidence to think that, and it also seems that like it kind of puts the cart before the horse in the sense that like it's not that the universe works because of some mathematical model. It's because it's our mathematical model works because the universe does. The universe exists prior to our model of it, and the model is not identical to the reality.
Yes, so that was sort of something I was going to say when you said like we could model how it would happen if we like adjusted the things, and that just seems a little circular to me because we're modeling that still under the assumptions of our constraints in the current universe, and it's like I just don't know that would get you empirical verification that other universes in other different ways couldn't work.
Yeah, well, yeah, it doesn't, in my opinion. So
there is one more answer to this, and that is David Hume's. David Hume says that you're all kind of stupid for asking the question because there is no answer that we could reasonably give that is either correct or incorrect because it is outside of the realm of human inquiry. He would simply say that, look, man, there's just nothing you can do to give a real answer in this that is either grounded in anything substantial or because he was an empiricist, right?
So the empiricists, man.
Yeah. So he would have simply said, you're all idiots for asking this question because we can't answer it, and therefore we shouldn't even care about it. But that was Hume, I
don't like that either, to be honest. But
I don't hate it.
Well, I was just saying earlier, it just seems to like just retreat into intellectual laziness, basically. I agree with him that we should recognize that there are epistemic limits to what we could and we could or could not know. Like, I don't think we have epistemic access to the prior probabilities of the laws of physics. I don't think we do. But nonetheless, I think any metaphysical theory that can give an explanation for these things is better than one that can't. The more kind of explanatory holes you have in your theory, in a holistic sense, the worse the theory is, in my opinion. And so there's no guarantee to say that this theory we have about reality is true on the basis of the theoretical virtues, whether that be parsimony or explanatory power or coherence or whatever. But I think it's the best we have, and I think we should still try and build a theory that meets those criteria. So, okay, I think that's everything. Then, do we have any more?
That is everything. No, that is.
I've asked that 3 times already. I forgot the answer each time. But yeah, Ed, thank you so much for doing this. It's been really interesting as a theist, actually, to go over some of these arguments because, I don't find most of them convincing, which is interesting, and I think many of them are built on presuppositions that I would reject. So,
come to the dark side, then. Atheism, it's great.
No, well, I mean, I'm a panentheist, so some people would accuse me of basically being an atheist with some woo spice sprinkled over. I don't know. I'm not particularly concerned about that kind of stuff. So,
right.
But yeah, man, thank you for doing this. If you're not already subscribed to Ed, then please do. Philosophical Convictions over on Substack. He'll obviously be linked on Substack, but if you're watching this on YouTube, then I'll put a link below to his Substack. Please do check him out and subscribe. So thank you, everyone. We'll call it a day. So good night. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. All right.
See you later, guys.
See ya.